Ricky Lambert has been doing some research on adoption. We received press releases about numbers, and I have him in the studio with me. Morning, Ricky. How are you?
Good morning, Wayne. Very good, thanks.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because it's not something that I've done a lot of research on, but I know that you've spent some time looking into the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare's Adoption Australia report. And what it shows is that 99% of all adoptions that take place in Australia, that is, children that are adopted out into a family, happening in New South Wales. That is an intriguing number, 99%.
Yeah, it's an incredible figure, 171 adoptions in our country out of foster care, of which 169, 99% happen in New South Wales. There is a minuscule additional number of what they call local adoptions where a child is given away and then they need to adopt them out, but that very rarely happens. That child would end up in foster care. They end up with a carer, and it's inevitably the carers who put themselves forward to say, we'd like to adopt this child.
So the New South Wales government is now saying that we're doing really well. Their Minister for Families and Communities and Disability there is Gareth Ward, and he's actually enunciated that our nation-leading open adoption policy is changing the lives of children across our state, providing them with safe, loving and permanent homes. Can New South Wales firstly take the position that the high ground is with them?
Oh, absolutely. And the reason we have that statement on the Flow News 24 website story is because we went to the New South Wales government asking, what are you doing right? And we asked the Victorian and South Australian governments, why aren't you doing anywhere near as well as New South Wales? So they were obviously quite happy, the New South Wales minister, to come back and thump the drum and say, we're doing a great job. But you can hear crickets in Victoria about this, but we have had indirect response from the South Australian government about this, and frankly, they don't care. They're not really worried about this.
Okay, let's go back a step. So if we don't adopt children out, that could be children that are in foster care that need a permanent home. If we say we're going to just leave them in foster care till they're 18, until they become an adult, we don't ever allow them to be adopted by that foster care home. That's one kind of circumstance we're talking about. Then there's the situation, isn't there, where you have a young couple can't have a baby, they decide that they're going to go overseas and get a baby from overseas. Is that still happening, and is that happening at the same levels?
Those numbers are plummeting. The number of couples that can't have a child who are looking overseas, the numbers are really plummeting, and that's what the Institute of Health and Welfare data showed, is there were several hundred, even 400 down from 10 years ago on international adoptions. They used to take over 4.5 years to complete. They're still taking 2 3/4 years to complete, but that number is right down, and usually those are couples who are adopting because they don't have any other children. I asked the Adopt Change representative I spoke with on Flow News 24 podcast earlier in the week if new fertility methods are actually reducing the interest in international adoption because they're getting better results. She wasn't sure that was connected, but I still suspect there's a factor there.
Okay, I want to ask you then, why with the current status in Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, Queensland, Northern Territory, ACT and Tasmania, why is there no adoptions? Is this a political reason? Is this that those departments that are representing the agency, if you like, the Families and Children's, or whichever agency each state calls it, is there something that's ideologically pushing against adoption and having children stay in foster care for their 18 years of their childhood life?
I think it absolutely is, and it's no coincidence that it's maybe a more right-of-centre government that's achieving great results in adopting children out of foster care and placing them with families, because at its core, the mentality from some of these governments is they believe that the state is the best parent, not parents, that the state should retain control because they know what's best for children, whereas the more right-of-centre thinking is, well, parents know what's best for children. And so I think there's no coincidence New South Wales is making great headway on this since the New South Wales Liberals took government, whereas governments that tend to be either Labor or a little bit small L liberal, like we see in South Australia, have got no interest in moving in this direction because this left-wing thinking about the state being the best parent for a child pervades throughout these child protection departments.
Okay, so Adopt Change CEO Renee Carter, she's told us in our report on Flow News 24 that they're glad that there's an upward trend, seeing some increase in open adoptions. Now, is this actually going to be the case? Do you think South Australia or Victoria will start to to turn back to the kind of figures that New South Wales are having, or are they simply closed off completely to the whole idea of adoption?
Well, I'm doubtful that those states will pick up their game in this area unless there's some political movement around this. But you mentioned open adoptions, and that's an important thing to pick up on, is that the old days of giving away a child and never hearing from them again, that's not what happens anymore. All of these adoptions that are happening out of foster care are called open adoptions, where the birth parent and parents are able to continue to have a relationship and communication with the child. So that's important for women who are, maybe pregnant and wondering what they should do with their baby. And it's interesting to note in the AIHW data that it's women in the range of 35 to 45 who are more often adopting children out. So you might have in your mind a young mother who's wanting to give up a child. That's not the demographic of who's giving children up for adoption.
Okay, so if you're wondering why a foster child in, say, Victoria or South Australia never gets adopted to the family which they are been with for a number of years, then it's because only 2 children outside of New South Wales last year were adopted in that way. That is a staggering figure. 169 children in that situation in New South Wales were adopted, just 2 for the rest of Australia. I think that sums up the report. You can have a look at it and the podcast too at flownews24.com.au. Thanks, Ricky.
Thank you.